Welcome to day 4 of the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. The challenge where you become an AI Pro in only 30 days, even if you start as a complete beginner. Yesterday, in day 3, we already built our very first end-to-end workflow, and today, in day 4, I want to cover why skipping the coding basics is a big mistake. I know everyone is talking about no-code solutions and that coding doesn't matter anymore. And I want to be completely honest with you. I never actually learned real coding, but nevertheless, I almost use it daily. And in this chapter, I want to present you why you also need to learn at least the very little coding basics. And of course, I will also teach you the basics that I think that are highly important to know about from the very beginning. I will make this super easy and I hope as fun as possible. And please don't skip that lecture if you have no idea about IT and coding, because you don't have to know all that right away, but it is important that you already heard about it. And step by step, you will get more familiar with all these concepts. Trust me, it is doable. I also learned it completely from scratch. It is no big thing. And with that being said, let's jump to my presentation and let's look at the coding and IT basics that you should know about. First of all, the big no-code idea is, in my opinion, just partly true. Yes, you can build completely without any code, but you will be quite limited. Because no matter how good the coding app is, for example, Windsurf or Replit or Lovable, at one point things will go wrong. And then what? If you then don't know any IT or coding basics, you are highly dependent of other experts who help you, who solve your problems, or from the platform itself. To sum it up, it's a problem. And if you just know a little bit about these basics, it's easier for you to estimate feasibilities, to customize your systems, and of course also troubleshoot if things break. So what do we do now with that information? First of all, you need to know enough to understand what you don't know. So this is point number 1. And if you have absolutely zero idea about IT and coding, you are already in big trouble because you don't even understand why things don't work. And this leads exactly to the next point. You need to know enough to be able to formulate a question and get help. Again, if you have no idea about coding and IT, and then suddenly your app or your code that you build stops working, you look at it and the results, and you have no idea why, you don't even have the vocabulary to express why it is not working, then you're in big trouble. But if you already understand at least some little basics, you can at least formulate a question and then you can get help, for example, from ChatGPT. And I can tell you, ChatGPT can almost solve any little problem you might ever experience. I tested this out and I also highly rely on the help of ChatGPT, and this works perfectly fine. Then you need to know enough to be able to change little details quick and easy yourself without relying on external help. Also, that is of course very important, because you might get a perfect working app from something like Lovable or Windsurf. But what are you doing if your client says, I want that color a little bit different, I want that button down here? Then you have problems. Of course, also these tools can do that, but I speak here from personal experience. They can't do everything. At one point, you have to step in and fix little details manually. Otherwise, you circle around forever. And in these cases, you have to know at least a little bit about the basics. And to finish this off, you need to know enough to be able to deliver more than low value solutions. If you have absolutely no idea about coding and IT basics, you are highly dependent of simple basic solutions. And I think it's pretty obvious that for simple basic solutions, you don't get paid as much as for highly customized solutions. Because of all that, you need to understand at least a little bit. Step by step, you will learn more as you go, but I want to start with some very simple concepts that are highly important. So let's have a look. First of all, I want to start with the question, what is Python and what is JavaScript? Then what is logic? What is a JSON? We actually already learned about it and used it yesterday. And then I also want to cover what is an API, HTTP requests, and a webhook. These are very, very crucial concepts that you have to know about because you will use them quite often. All right, so let's jump in. What is Python? Python is a programming language that lets you tell the computer what to do using simple readable words. And this is already a big important point to understand, because in most people's head who never touched code or IT, they think that coding is just these O's and ones aligned and is binary code. But there are also coding languages like Python that are based on human readable natural language. And this is of course a big advantage because you already can at least read what is standing there on the screen and you are not just looking at O's and ones. As I said, it's great for beginners because it looks like actual English. You can use it to build websites, app, analyze data, automate tasks, and of course to build tools for AI agents. And also within that 30-day automation pro challenge, we will use that quite often, as you will see later as we progress. The best part, ChatGPT and other LLMs are fantastic in writing Python code. So we can just tell ChatGPT to write the code for us and it will do it. And we will do exactly that later in the challenge so that you learn how to do it yourself. So to sum this up, Python is a programming language that we will use to automate things and build applications. But the best part, you don't have to write it yourself. ChatGPT will do it for us. You just need to know how to instruct it, and I show you how you do that. On that example image, we see typical Python code and how this looks like. You see, it is basically English. You can just read the words. At that point, you don't understand why these words are there, and it doesn't matter. I just want to show you already how this code looks like. And we will use exactly something like that later in the challenge. All right, then let's talk about JavaScript. JavaScript is also a programming language that makes websites interactive and dynamic. Imagine it like that. If you would just have a plain HTML website, there would basically be just a plain text in the internet. But as you know that, you oftentimes have the opportunity to click something, or something is loading, or it is moving, or there are different colors changing, and all that is also done with JavaScript. Exactly like Python, you can also use it to build web apps, mobile apps, automate tasks, and connect APIs. And this is exactly what we will use it for later in our workflows. Important to know is that JavaScript is the default coding language within n8n, and we will use it a lot in the so-called code elements within n8n. I already mentioned that in the very beginning when we talked about the basics of n8n, and you will see very soon how this works. So you just have an element, you put in the JavaScript will be executed by n8n, and you just get the result. And all that will also be done by ChatGPT or any other LLM, because they are fantastic in writing JavaScript exactly as in writing Python. All right, I also included a little image how this looks like. You see, it is also plain English, so you actually see what is going on. And no worries, you don't have to understand what this code is doing. I will guide you through all that step by step, and my promise is you will understand what you will do. So no worries about that. Don't skip the video at that point. All right, that's it regarding the programming languages, Python and JavaScript. And now we continue with logic. And logic is of course a word that anyone knows about. You use it super often while talking, and you're actually super familiar with logic. But we will of course use logic in a slightly different context, in the context of programming and IT. And in that context, logic is how a computer makes decisions based on conditions. So this is what we understand under logic in that context. And I want to demonstrate that with a little example. If it is raining, I'll take an umbrella. Otherwise, I won't. So this is straight logic that we understand as humans. We just apply some conditions, but of course we have to translate these conditions into something that the computer can understand. And this is what we understand under logic. And to make it even simpler, the skill of translating natural language, like the example you just saw or any idea in your head, into a set of computer readable rules, this is coding. So you basically just enable a computer to read and understand certain rules and execute accordingly. And I want to follow up with some more logic examples so that you totally get that point. If it is raining, I'll take an umbrella, otherwise I won't. So this is an if condition, and we will use that quite often later in n8n. Then it also could be a condition like that. If I'm hungry and I have money, I go to the restaurant. So we have a AND condition, and this combines two different conditions to decide if it is true or not. The next one is a so-called OR condition. If you come home late or drunk, I am angry. So this could be a condition of your wife or girlfriend, and we already see the difference here. In that case, both has to be true so that the overall condition is fulfilled. And here it is enough if just one of these two conditions is true so that the overall expression is true. And here's the last one. If what you are saying is not right, I'll punch you in the face. I hope you don't get a condition like that, but I just wanted to use it to demonstrate the not condition. Because we cannot only check if something is true or existent or whatever, we can also make the rule based on the fact if this is not true. So all these are different logic examples, and you will naturally use that step by step when we build with N8N. And on the next slide, I want to show you two examples how this could look like on the left side in Python and on the right side how a condition looks like in N8N. So in Python, you write things like that, if and then else. No worries, you don't have to understand what is happening here. And in N8N, this is represented by such an element. Here could, for example, be a condition. If the user selected send a message, we go that route. And if the user didn't click that button, we just end the workflow here. So this is how it looks like in N8N, and this is how you will work with these logic conditions. So this is all you have to understand at this point. All right, that's it regarding logic, and now we continue with JSON. JSON is something super important when it comes to building with N8N, and you already saw it yesterday that we actually already used it. JSON means JavaScript Object Notation. It's a simple text format used to store and exchange data between systems, especially in webhooks and APIs. We will cover that in a second. And it is easy to read and write for both humans and machines. And this is, of course, a huge advantage because at the end of the day, we always talk with machines, computers. And the great thing with JSON is that also we can read it, but also the computer. And I want to demonstrate you the full power of JSON on the next slide. So here we have two examples. On the left side, we have the same information as on the right side, but on the left side, this is a JSON format, and this is just plain text separated with commas. And the big question is, why is the left JSON format better to work with than the right format? Because on the first look, you could think this looks even more complicated than that. And yes, you're kind of right, but you have to think that also the computer and the machine has to find the right information. And I want to demonstrate that on the next slide. Because if we look closely at the JSON format, we see that it is highly structured and organized. We have all these blue parts, the brackets, and then these quotes and the columns, and we have the so-called keys, city, country, prime minister, and time zone. And these keys are basically the names of the data that is contained in the so-called values. So the yellow words here are the key names, and the green ones are the values. So again, it is always a combination of a JSON key, for example, city, and a JSON value, for example, London. And I hope that now you understand better why this JSON format is so useful, because we can tell a computer, for example, always use the value that you find in the key city, and then the computer will always know where to look for that information. If we would just say find the city, this could be anything, because it could be London, Berlin, Munich, whatsoever. And because of that, we always work with the JSON format, especially within N8N workflows. Also that, no worries, you don't have to write this yourself. ChatGPT can easily do that. I just wanted you to already hear about the JSON concept. All right, now we continue with API, HTTP requests, and webhooks. And also this might sound a little bit complicated and confusing, but you will totally naturally use that later when we build workflows. It just helps if you generally understand these concepts. So let's begin. An API, an application programming interface, is basically a set of rules that defines how software systems can talk to each other. For example, our Anytime workflow and Google Sheet. There has to be a set of rules how this works, and this is the so-called API. An HTTP request is the actual message you send to an API. So more or less the data that gets exchanged, this is done via a HTTP request. And then we have a webhook, and a webhook is basically the reverse direction of an API call. And I will illustrate that in a second, then you will totally understand what I mean with that. All right, so let's begin with the different types of HTTP requests to different APIs. We could, for example, have application 1, for example, an AI agent or an Anytime workflow. And this application is sending a so-called post request with the goal send data to another application, for example, a website. And then the website will send a response. Remember, we used that in the workflow we built. We send out a post request to replicate, and the response was the URL where we can download the image. So you already used that yesterday when we built the first workflow. And then we also have the other direction, and we also used this already yesterday. Remember, exactly after we created the image, we used another HTTP element, and there we just send over the image URL and we get back the actual image to our workflow. So here you see exactly how this works. We always have the possibility to send a post request or a get request, and the only difference is what our actual goal is. Is our goal to send data? In our example, we send over the image prompt, or is our goal to get data? In the example of yesterday, we get back the entire image. Just keep in mind, especially when you compare that with webhooks, that always the left side here is initiating the conversation. In the example of yesterday, it was our Anytime workflow that initiated the entire process, right? Because we sent an image prompt to replicate, we got back the image URL, and then we again reached out to replicate to download the image. So all with our side initiated the conversation. This is important. Just keep it in mind for a second when we talk about webhooks. All right, so let's have a look about the webhook. At the webhook, it is quite the opposite. We have an application, for example, an AI agent or a Anytime workflow. And the goal here is basically just waiting to get new data whenever something is available. So our side, the workflow, is just waiting, and whenever something is happening on the other side, this side will just push it to our webhook. And in that case, always the right side is initiating the conversation. And I hope now you get the idea between these different concepts. If you would apply that principle to the example of yesterday, this would mean that at any point, replicate would just send an image to our workflow. Then we would need a webhook exactly for that. But as in our example, we wanted to define when we reach out and when we want the image, we had to go with the HTTP requests and not with a webhook. All right, this is everything that I wanted to cover in that very first IT and coding basics chapter. And I hope now you understand why you should not entirely skip the coding and IT basics, because just knowing about these little concepts will make your life so much easier, especially when we keep building more complex things. For now, no worries, you don't have to memorize all that. I just want you to understand the basics of these concepts, and that whenever you struggle while building something, you hear JSON or webhook and you don't understand, okay, what was this again? You can come back to that chapter, and then you will better understand why we do the things, how we do them. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments or write me an email. I'm happy to help. All right, that's it for day 4 of the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. Let me know in the comments what you think about this basic chapter. Was it clear? Was it too difficult? Did you already have these basics available? And then we will continue tomorrow at day 5 where we continue with cloud servers. Also, feel free to share your progress on Instagram, tag me, let me know how it is going, and of course feel free to invite other people to the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. If you haven't checked it out yet, go to challenge.germanaicreator.com, sign up for free, because there you will get all the resources, all the workflows, just everything we use within the challenge completely for free as a download. See you tomorrow. Cheers, Dom.